I'm going to move into a series for the next 3 weeks that we are calling Encounters with Jesus. There it is. And we are very specifically going to look at some ideas from Luke chapter 5. And so it's important that we have kind of a shared frame of reference for that. So what we're going to do now is, if you've got a Bible with you, or if you can get access to Luke chapter 5, what I mean by that is if you've got a smartphone or a tablet or whatever else it might be, if you've got your filament Bible with you, or if you've got any other kind of Bible with you, then if you get yourself to Luke chapter 5, and we are going to read together verses 1 through to 11. So if you want to huddle up with some people, if you want to turn around, this is your opportunity. If you're fed up with the person that you've been sat next to for the last half an hour, now is your opportunity to move yourself. But let's read that together. We're going to take a couple of minutes just to read that together. Then I'm going to share some thoughts with us on that. But Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11, whichever translation you like, whichever iteration you like, whoever you want to read that out loud to your team, your conglomerate of Jesus followers, your friends, neighbors, whomever you are gathered with. Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. Online, I don't know what you're going to do. Put it in the chat. Put the kettle on. Just give us 5 minutes. Share together. Maybe you can type out a line each. Is that dramatic? That's probably dramatic, isn't it? But read Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11, and then 2-3 minutes, then we're going to come back together. All right, let's go. Thank you. So, next 3 weeks, we want to zoom right in and think about some of these things. Encounters with Jesus. This line existed in our previous thoughts, so 3 minutes where we had the sand timers, remember? We've all been. Somebody remember, please. All right, good, thank you. We spend so much time and effort on these things. Please remember. But we have been thinking about 3 minutes. So how do we pray? How do we listen? How do we act? This is a continuation of those thoughts. So don't abandon those ideas. We want to carry those into what we're doing. We are layering ideas here. You're all competent enough and capable enough of carrying these thoughts through with us. And so we are going back in the book of Luke to go forward in our series. So we're in chapter 5 to pick up some of the things that are happening around these verses. I have shared some of these thoughts from these verses before. So you might have heard me say some of these things, and that is completely appropriate and okay. If you were in youth back in the summer, I've shared an iteration of some of these thoughts with you. So you'll go, hang on, this feels familiar. That's because it is. These are some ideas that I want to give to us, and through repetition, the tool of repetition, that's sometimes useful for us to re-engage with some thoughts and with some ideas. So if you think, hang on a minute, haven't we been here before? Congratulations, because it means you're probably under the age of 16. Well done. The future is bright. You are the future. We're all a little bit nervous. But also, yes, we are thinking about these things on purpose. You will have just read, I hope, this encounter that Simon Peter has with Jesus. So there's straight away we are into this theme, encounters with Jesus. And some things happen that even if you haven't read these verses before, I feel that there's probably a good level of awareness of this story, this encounter, this moment. I feel confident that we carry some thoughts. You will perhaps have encountered Jesus through other people's encounters with Jesus in these verses. And so what's familiar to us can sometimes need a little bit of work for us to connect with it. And so as I have been thinking about these things, thinking about encounters with Jesus, what does that mean for us? How does that shape things in us? How does that help us as community? There are some things that I want to draw out from here to bring our attention to something that may be familiar. And if you've never encountered this stuff before, you're welcome to. I'm confident that it will help us all wherever we pick this up. So, Peter is learning who Jesus is through encounter. There's some connection that has already happened. Jesus has been doing Jesus-y things up until this point, and then he arrives at this moment, and the crowd are kind of pressing in, and so there are some practical needs that need to be met, and Jesus is like, there's a boat, let me push out and create an environment where people are going to be able to hear and connect with what I want to teach them. Does that make sense? Everybody got a picture of that in your mind's eye? So Jesus has been doing the things that we kind of know and understand. He's been healing people, transforming things. He's been challenging the way that people think. He's been engaging with people. And the crowd has gathered. We want to see the show. We like it when the things happen. And so there are people around. And so practically, there is a logistical issue. And so Jesus has responded to the logistical issue, seen this opportunity in the boats and gone, let me create an environment where I can speak to people and they are literally practically going to be able to hear. There's an amplification thing that's happening. Steve, I'm sure, will get very excited and can tell you about the benefits of projecting your voice across water and what that does to acoustics and the natural kind of bowl and shape of what was happening in that space and how there's some natural amplification. Exciting stuff. So we are driven by these practical solutions that Jesus wants to connect with people. But more specifically, I think he is saying to Simon Peter, hey, I want you to know who I am. And so I want to facilitate an encounter with you so that you have a revelation, an understanding, a new depth, a connection, getting to grips with who I am. Why do I think that? Because I think there are three types of encounter that Jesus facilitates with Peter in this exchange. From taking his boat, from commandeering his tools of his profession to create something to deal with the practical necessities of what he was facing. I think Jesus is the possessor of all knowledge, and so knows that it's meeting practical needs, but it's also giving layers of revelation to the crowd, to Peter, and to us. So what's happening? What are these three encounters? Encounter brings understanding, and so the first encounter that we see happen is an encounter in time. An encounter in time. So what gives me confidence in saying that? So practically, let's pick up what's happening. Jesus stepping into one of the boats, asked Simon, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. Verse 4, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish. Verse 5, Master, Simon replied, we worked hard all night and didn't catch a thing. So when is this happening? When is this encounter happening? If they've worked all through the night, when is this encounter happening? In the day. In the daytime. Good. It's not a trick. Like, that's the answer. So there's an encounter in time. Does anybody fish? Anybody actually go fishing? Chris fishes. I know Chris fishes. What don't you want to do when you're fishing is encounter an environment where the fish are spooked or scared or are hiding. And so this is why professional fisher people would fish at night, because the sun is going to cause the fish to sink to the bottom through the day. It's too bright, it's too hot. Fish, funny creatures, aren't into it, not interested. Fish are not being interested in being caught through the day. And so the sun's too hot, the conditions are not right, and so they are going to hide and sink. Jesus gives the instruction to Simon. He has an encounter in time. He asks him to do something at the wrong time. Does that make sense? In the tradition, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the ability, they didn't have, we were not set up to fish through the day. Very practical, the sun's shining, fish don't like it, they're going to hide, not going to do it. Jesus says to Peter, who is a professional fisherman, go back out in the morning. And so when Peter says, Master, we've worked hard all night, this is not an openness to the suggestions of the divine. This is, you don't know what you're doing. You haven't got a clue. Like, you've clearly never fished for anything before. What's going on? He has an encounter in time. Hold on to that. Second encounter. He has an encounter in method. What gives me confidence in that? Verse 4, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, now go out where it's deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish. That's the wrong method. It's the wrong method. That's not how it worked. The technology that was available at the time worked usually in pairs and would have a drag net that would skim across the top of the surface of the water, which is why we need to fish at night. Come on. Intelligent in the room today. So we're fishing at night because the fish are going to come to the surface. The technology that I have available means that I need a partner boat to work with me, and we have a drag net that we take across the surface of the lake, and we're going to do that over and over and over again, and we're going to scoop up everything that we have through the power of the technology and the wisdom that's available to us. We're going to drag that net across between two boats. Can you see the picture in your mind's eye? Imagine you're on the lake in Sutton Park. You're sat Carter Miller, you're enjoying your steak, not even thinking about fish. And then there's two boats going across the top. And what's that they've got tied between them? Oh, it's a dragnet. And they're bringing it across the surface of the lake. That's what the technology was. That's how it would have worked. Jesus says to Simon Peter in this moment, go out on your own, drop a net not designed for depth, and there I want you to catch. Simon Peter is saying to Jesus, you don't know what you're doing. I am the professional in this environment, and that's not how we fish. That's not how this works. They use heavy drag nets between two boats, and now Jesus has just stolen my boat, has taught people from my boat, and is now telling me how to use my equipment. He has an encounter in method. Third encounter. He has an encounter in emotion. So we've had time, method, and now we have an encounter in emotion. I wasn't there, but trust me, Peter didn't feel like fishing. Peter did not feel like fishing. We know that from some of the language. Verse 5, Master, Simon replied. He doesn't mean that in a reverential way. He doesn't mean that in a way that Lord of Lords, King of Kings, Creator of the universe, have your way in me. What he's saying is, I've just finished work. I've just finished a very unsuccessful shift. You have inconvenienced me. You've taken my equipment. You've now had the presumption to tell me how to do my job that you clearly don't know how to do because you're giving me an encounter in time and an encounter in method. So at the wrong time of day and with the wrong technology and with the wrong ideas, I don't want to go fishing anymore. All right, smart guy, if that's what you think I need to do, come on then, let's go. Peter has no expectation to catch anything because as the expert, he's done all the right things at all the right times. He knows there is nothing to be caught in that lake. Are you with me? Can you see what's happening here? Jesus wants Peter to know who he is through encounter. Then what happens? He does the thing begrudgingly. He says, okay, wise guy, we have worked all night as a team. I don't know why you're picking on me. You know how this works. But sure, let's make it about the individual. Peter says in tone, in emotion, in response, in ideas to Jesus. We, the team, see those lads over there looking very confused about why I've just let our equipment go back out and we've spent all this time cleaning it, not having done anything successful with it. Great, I've now got to give a team talk when I get back as well and get everybody back up. Who's this guy? What's he doing? Are you bringing him into partnership in the firm? He doesn't look like he really knows what he's doing, to be honest, Peter. I'm not quite sure why you would limit our business propositions in this way, but fine, whatever. So Peter is feeling the pinch of this encounter. Can you hear what I'm saying? An encounter in time, an encounter in method, and an encounter in emotion. Peter didn't feel like fishing. He's the expert. He's been out. Jesus asks him in the wrong way to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. Then what happens? Verse 6. And this time, the nets were so full of fish, they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners, which gives us confidence he was sent out on his own, brought the partners in the other boat. And soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man. For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people. As soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. Peter had an encounter in the wrong time, the wrong method, and in the wrong emotions. Jesus wanted Peter to know who Jesus is. Why does that give me confidence of that awareness of that situation? When Peter realized what had happened, his fixation is not on the fish or on the fortune. And we know that because he leaves it. The very first opportunity he has when he gets to shore, his life has been radically, supernaturally transformed. The thing that he, doing all the right things at all the right times, with all the right teams and with all the right technology, his encounter in time and in method and in emotion had brought him to an emptiness, a realization, a desperation, a frustration. He wants to check out, he wants to give up, he wants to get lost. He's sick of this man annoying him, setting him up for professional failure, embarrassing him. It's inconvenient, he's tired, he's annoyed, he's had enough. He knows the answer to this question. And then he goes out and he does the thing that the Son of God has asked him to do. And wouldn't we believe it? There is transformation. There's an encounter with Jesus. But then when Simon Peter realizes who he has had an encounter with, he understands what his condition is. Why is that important? Because he's not fixated with the fish or with the fortune. Hear this. The very first opportunity he gets, he leaves what would be transformational. It would be life-changing. The nets are tearing. This is like the greatest day of their professional career, I presume. The nets are tearing. That's it. You've caught so much. It's ruined your ability to go out the next day, but you don't need to go out the next day. The boat is sinking. They are so prosperous. They're so affluent now. They are so overwhelmed by what has just happened that they could say, Jesus, can you come back again tomorrow and we'll build a little storehouse? And if we could do this regularly, it means I don't have to work all night. I mean, it's quite convenient, actually, if you just rock up and at the wrong time and give me the wrong method, but somehow manage to give me all of these things at the first opportunity. They stopped being fixated with the fish, with the fortune. They left it to follow Jesus. Because the realization, I believe, that Simon Peter had was who he had an encounter with. I've written this for us. Simon Peter realized he'd had an encounter with someone not limited by time, with knowledge beyond learnt behavior, and knew his condition. In response to that realization, Jesus has to say to him, do not be afraid. If somebody turned up in our world at the wrong time for what we know we want to see happen, and asked us to do, in our opinion, the wrong thing to achieve what we want to achieve, and from the wrong motive when I don't want to do it, an encounter with the holiness of God, an encounter with the provision of God, an encounter with the grace of God, an encounter with the kindness of God, an encounter with the grace of God, an encounter filling with the Spirit of God will bring an awareness to our condition that will say, God, I'm not holy to be in your presence. Jesus knows who he is. Jesus knows that he is the Son of God. Jesus knows that before there was anything, he was the I am. Jesus knows that outside of time, outside of learnt behavior, and in spite of Simon Peter's condition, he's going to have an encounter with him. He's going to bring a revelation of who he is to him. And so in response to that, the only right response to that some of these parallels will be familiar to some of us. I am a man of unclean lips. I can't go there, Jesus. I can't be in that space. You do not know who I am. Do you not know how I think? Do you not know how I let people down? Do you not know what I say about the people when they're not in the office to their face? Do you not know what I feel about that neighbor? Do you not know what I feel about that person, that partner, that place, or that thing? Jesus, do you not know this about me? And you clearly are not limited to time, and you are not limited by my learnt behavior, and you're not limited by how I feel about what you want to do in the earth. It's not safe for me to be near you. Do you hear what Jesus is saying and doing in these moments? That our encounters with Jesus will bring an awareness to our condition that needs us to be near him, but we know that we can't in our own right and in our own sake be near him. And so the call and the commission and the command of Jesus is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Because it's terrifying to be near Jesus. It's terrifying to be around somebody who is not limited by time. I had no influence over when the sun rose this morning. None. In fact, on my drive in, did anybody see the moon this morning? Anybody up early enough to see the moon? The sun was up, the moon was out. It's full moon. It was enormous. It was really, really low. I thought it might have been the end of time. It wasn't. It's fine. We're here. I can't influence those things. The one who sets those things in motion says, do not be afraid, to Simon Peter. And an encounter has revealed who Jesus is to him. We have ideas as team. Pastor Sarah has already alluded to us this morning that we plan carefully and we pray deeply and we invest time in how we are going to communicate as community, move as community, the things that we believe God is calling us to. There is learnt behavior, there is method, there is a way of doing things that God is not limited by. There is an account and a story, and maybe we'll talk about it another day, of a donkey being the mouthpiece for the will of God. I can't program that. I can't inspire us to do that. I can't bring that to our attention. Jesus turns up and says, I love what you're doing in the way that you're doing it, but I'm not limited by what you're doing in the way that you're doing it. Let me show you who I am way outside of what you can control. Let me show you who I am way outside of how things, quote unquote, should be done. Let me bring you a catch that will tear the nets, and it's got nothing to do with you. And it's nothing that you asked for, because you'd given up, your shift had finished, you were out, you were done. You were ready to clock off and try again tomorrow. When you are fed up, when you are checked out, when you are finished, when you think it is over, let me show you a way, let me teach you and tell you a way, he says to Simon Peter, that will make you dependent on me and not on your learnt behavior. There is a way of being that comes from internal transformation as a result of being near Jesus. And saying, I can't hang out in this space. The one who exists outside of time is too holy for me to be here. The one who will use anything, anyone, any way, anyhow to see his purposes achieved. On my days where I can't get to seem to understand it, where I can't conform my behavior in a way that other people would think that I've been with him in ways that go outside of and beyond what I feel capable of controlling. The one who knows all things and is in all things and is control of all things and is beyond all things says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Peter realized he'd had an encounter with someone not limited by time, with knowledge outside of learnt behavior, who knew his condition. He knew he didn't want to go. He knew he didn't want to go. He knew he'd been working all night because he's God. And so when Peter has this realization of he's God, God has been on my boat. God has been on my boat. I paint that picture in your mind's eye. God has been sat in my living room. The creator of all things has been on my commute with me this week. Get out the car. Get out the car. I've said some things looking for a parking space that you shouldn't hear, Jesus. I've thought some things about some people who aren't like me that aren't right to be around you, Jesus. I've done some things in my life that I'm not proud of, Jesus. The one who exists way outside of time and of method and how I feel says to Simon Peter, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Encounter brings understanding. When we understand who Jesus is, we will change the way that we think, speak, and act. But we have to do some of that work. We have to lean into some of those things. So what does that look like? And here is where we're going to talk together. We are going to share some thoughts and some time together. This is a book that I created for myself 5 years ago. I checked the date. I date stamped it on the first day that I used it. And this is 5 years ago I had this thought. And it says, you can't really tell anymore, but it used to say 4 questions. 4 questions. And there are 4 questions that I think can be helpful to us. And I'm going to talk us through them, and then we're going to spend time talking with each other in the time that we have left today about how I feel this might be helpful to us and for us, because we need to encounter when, what, and why. So time, method, and emotion. When, what, and why. And we can take some ownership and responsibility for when, what, and why. We can shape our days around when, what, and why. We can ask some questions of ourselves and each other. So we've had an encouragement to get into spaces this week and to reconnect. And maybe if you are enthusiastic about that and then you go, but I'm not quite sure what I'd do in a space, even if I did have one. 4 questions. 4 questions. Talk to each other about these 4 questions. So let me run us through them really quickly. Josh, can we just put up the final screen, please? Thank you. Perfect. These are the 4 questions. Today I am, and then there is a blank. Today I have read, and then there's a blank. Today God has said, and today I have helped. Let me talk us through these, and then we're going to talk to each other about them. Today I am. I believe it is helpful to us to record feedback of our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual condition. We can be really purposeful about this. We can be really deliberate about this. Now, some of you might feel the pinch of, I'm not a journal person, it's not really my jam, I'm not really into it. Take the idea and make it move into your world. Take possession of it. You might need to make a note on your phone. You might need to make a mark on something that you create. You might need to say to somebody else, hey, will you help me figure this out? But understand the drive of the question. Today I am. Keep in step with what is happening in your body, in your mind, your emotions, and your soul, for want of kind of language that helps us get there quickly. Because things are happening in our lives that maybe the Spirit of God is talking to us about, but if we are not keeping tabs, if we're not aware of where we're at and what's happening, we're going to start to feel out of control. We're going to start to feel a bit wobbly, and then when the presence of God arrives on our boat, continue the metaphor, we're going to say, I don't want to go fishing. I've been out all night. I'm tired and frustrated, and I've been doing things in the time that they're supposed to be done as to my agenda, in the way that they should be done as per my agenda, and now I'm grumpy about it because my agenda hasn't been met. Do you hear what I'm saying? And so what this gives us is an opportunity to look back and say, oh, actually, for the last 3 days, I've been really frustrated. Why am I frustrated? Who do I need to speak to about that? How do I move to a place where I can remedy that? What's the Spirit of God teaching me and telling me and saying to me about these things? Or we can look back and we say, hey, for a week, I've been absolutely flying. What's happening in my world that is putting me in a condition where I'm open to things happening outside of my time, outside of my learnt behavior, and outside of the limits of my emotions? Are you with me? It's a feedback tool. That's all it is. And if you hate it, move on. Find something else. It's okay. But we need to be better at recording how we are feeling, what's happening in our minds, in our bodies, in our emotions, in our soul. We need to give an account of our condition, and that starts with ourselves. Today I have read. Now, some of you are avoiding eye contact with me for this one. You haven't read anything since you left school many moons ago, and you're like, that ain't my jam. I was made to do it. It's not my favorite. I'm not going to connect with it. I'm not really into it. We'll let the rest of you worry about the reading. Good news. This includes you. This includes what you have engaged with that's taught you something. And so an easier way to get there is to say, today I have read. Because for some of us, that will look like physical books. For some of us, that will look like a podcast. For some of us, that will look like an interaction with a visual art. For some of us, that will look like a connection with something outside of myself that has taught me something. That I am I'm maintaining an open posture to learning. Does that make sense? This is why this is here. This is why this is important. Because Jesus arrived, the presence of God arrived into Peter's world, and his posture was closed. He wasn't ready to learn. He wasn't ready to embrace a new way. He wasn't ready to connect with the kingdom of God because he wanted it done in his time and his method and what he felt should have been his way. And so the encounter with Jesus happened at the wrong time with the wrong method and from the wrong emotion. If I stay closed to what I can learn, I ain't going to do anything new. And this is not about newness for newness' sake. This is about if I do what I've always done, I'm going to get what I've always got. Has the kingdom come in all of its fullness in your life yet? No is the answer to that question. And so in the pursuit of the kingdom of God, I might have to remain open to being taught some things by the Spirit of God in my life. Does that make sense? So when we say things like, today I have read, I'm just going to keep a note of what's teaching me and how it's teaching me, what it's telling me, what I've learned from it, what's good. That might be a book. Push yourself, be brave, see how you go. You don't have to read the whole thing by the end of the week. Read a chapter a day. Fine, give it a go. Get yourself an audiobook. Get yourself a podcast. Get yourself next to people who you know are learning things and are reading things. And listen, you don't have to come and give us an exegesis on Leviticus next week. I mean, you could try, but that's not the goal. The goal here is find something that you love, find something that you like, learn about it, lean into it. It could be your favorite team, it could be your favorite place, it could be your favorite thing, it could be your favorite hobby, it could be your favorite idea, it could be your favorite person. Start somewhere, be brave this week, learn something this week, lean into being open this week, lean into being open to the Spirit of God, directing your travel this week, being open to the Spirit of God, challenging my time, my method, my emotions. Which leads us to the third question. Today, God has said. Now, this is a record of what God is doing through people, places, and things. There are people in the room, I'm confident, who have heard and will hear the audible voice of God. If that is not you, don't panic. Don't panic. All of creation exists to give God glory. So you might need to go and do a lap of Sutton Park. You might need to go and stomp the hawthorn. You might need to connect with something created. You might need to say to somebody, what's God talking to you about? Put somebody else in the spot. What's God talking to you about? What's God saying to you? And how do you hear that? How do you know that? Don't freak yourself out about the limits of, I haven't heard the audible voice of God. We know in community, God is giving people dreams. We've had them in. We've had the good news stories in. We know that God is speaking to people through dreams. We know that God is speaking to people through prophetic words. We know that God is speaking to people through the scriptures. We know that God is speaking to people through others in community. We know that God is speaking to people through his creation. God is speaking. Are we listening? Are we open to what he wants to say, to what he wants to encourage in us, teach us, bring us up and out into the fullness of his kingdom? We've got to write it down. If the creator of all things is speaking to you, grab it and never let it go. Never, ever, ever, ever let it go. Write it down, and I promise you, in 20 minutes, in 20 years, 200 years, it will still be encouraging. If it's from God, it will always speak life to you. That's why we re-engage with scriptures that are not new to us. That's why there's always something to learn. God is always speaking. God is always moving, and are we paying attention? Which leads us to, as I become more like him, what's going to happen? I'm going to be less fixated on the fish and on the fortune, what I get out of it. God is evidencing he is in control of all things. You can have all the material wealth in the world, Jesus says to Simon Peter. What does Simon Peter do? I want you, Jesus. I want you. It doesn't even compare. It doesn't even compare to being with you. An encounter with Jesus. And we can facilitate encounters with the Spirit of God by asking ourselves these 4 questions. Today I am, today I've read, today God has said, today I have helped. Now, they might need to change shape in your world. You might need to move them around a little bit. You might need 5 questions. You might need 2 questions. You might need 8 questions. You might need no questions. This is somewhere for us to start together. This is not homework. You don't have to get a book. You don't have to do it the way that I have done it. You don't have to do anything with it if you don't want to. But an encounter with Jesus happens on his time, way beyond what I have learned and got the ability to do, and in spite of how I feel about being sent back out again. Does that make sense? So if these help us engage in that, this is 5 years of process for me, and not every page is filled in. There are huge swathes of time where I haven't re-engaged with this. Don't beat yourself up about making it something that you have to do and, pun intended, religiously bind yourself to. The point is an encounter with Jesus, not an encounter with the device that points us, reminds us, encourages us, releases us, gives us the freedom to have an encounter with Jesus. Life is busy. Life is hard. There are things to do. This is not us giving you another thing to do, another thing to compress and stack into your world, another thing to find a way to do, another thing to carve out more time, to chisel more time, to stop doing other things to do. If this is helpful in our rhythm, in our pattern, in our flow of how we are discipled to Jesus, then pick it up, run with it, and use it. If this is leaving you absolutely as cold as one of those fish on the side of the beach, next week's coming. Don't worry about it, it's fine. If this helps us facilitate an encounter with Jesus, then use it. Let's talk to each other about it. Let's use this language, this idea of 4 questions of helping each other understand that we can take ownership and responsibility for an encounter with Jesus. Does that make sense? So, full of the joy that feels present in the room, we're going to talk to each other about these 4 things. And then from 12 o'clock, Karen and the team are going to come back and lead us and help us kind of know that we have come into land. There's no conclusion. There's no moralizing. There's no takeaway. And this is how this applies to you, because we're going to figure this out now in real time. What question stands out to you? What do you feel would be helpful to you? What are you less keen on? What doesn't make sense? If you are confused or afraid of, I don't really know if I can approach that one. I don't really know how I would do that. This is our opportunity to talk to each other about what's God said to you recently, or how do I figure out how I help people? What does that mean? How can I be involved? How do I do that safely? How do I do that confidently? How do I do that so that people don't feel threatened by it? How do I do that so it's not weird? Please don't let it be weird. What does it mean today I am? How I've never tapped into that feedback loop in myself. I've never thought about bringing an assessment of my own condition. The answers are in the room. The answers are in the room. Let's help each other figure these things out and if they're useful to us. So Josh and the team, if we could stick some music on, that would be amazing. Online, we're going to leave you with the screen. Otherwise, there's not going to be much for you to see. In the chat, be helping each other, figuring these things out with each other. Let's connect with each other. Turn yourselves around. Say hello to somebody. We've got 5-6 minutes, and then Kaz and the team are going to come and lead us to move on today. All right, let's go. Thank you.